so much for joining today's virtual lecture. My name is Dr. Amanda Wan, as Carlos mentioned, and I'm currently serving as the director of the China Asia program at IWP. I'm also an adjunct faculty. I'm teaching two courses on North Korean espionage, as well as North Korea and geopolitics of Northeast Asia. And we just launched a study abroad study abroad course to Taiwan. We just literally came back from Taiwan a couple of days ago through our partnership with the Loyola University of Maryland. So, launched in September 2022, the China Asia program is a new initiative at IWP encompassing academic courses, lectures, and research about Asia, specifically China, Taiwan, and North Korea. One of the program's long-term goals is to establish partnerships with other academic institutions in the U.S. as well as allied countries in the Northeast Asia region. Through these partnerships, IWP will invite international students from the allied countries to participate in IWP's master's and doctoral programs, both online and in person, and provide IWP students with study abroad opportunities in said region, including the Republic of Korea, Japan, in addition to Taiwan, which was just launched this May. Uh, and today's event is part of the China Asia program's Asia Initiative Lecture Series. And we have Mr. Yanni Killick, who will discuss TikTok from first principles, why it's the CCP's most potent weapon against America and the West. Mr. Yanni Killick is a senior editor with the Epoch Times and the host of the show American Thought Leaders. Killick's career has spanned academia, media, and international human rights work. In 2009, he joined the Epoch Times and has served in a variety of roles, including as website chief editor. He was an executive producer of the award-winning Holocaust documentary film Finding Many. So let's please welcome Mr. Killick. Jan, thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to your presentation.
Hello, Amanda, Dr. Wan. It's such a pleasure to have this opportunity to speak with you all. You know, as it would happen, I'm here in DC, and I was just at the IWP mansion earlier today, talking with the Chancellor, John Lanchowski, about all sorts of things related to our topic today. And I'm going to kind of let his things that I know that he's told you. If you're basically people who have gone through the programs that I do, you are familiar with John's sort of philosophy or approach to education and understanding diplomacy. This will be very helpful. So basically what I want to do with this talk is to give you a sense of not just how TikTok works, but how the Chinese Communist Party works. There are elements that will help inform what TikTok how it might actually work. That's the idea from first principles. So let's get started. So let's begin with the concept of unrestricted warfare. Unrestricted Warfare is a book that was written some years ago by two Chinese colonels, and it outlines a whole range of non-kinetic warfare methods that should be utilized. That this was not something that they said has to be implemented, but there's this idea that dictatorships around the world have this ability, especially communist dictators, of telegraphing what it is that they're actually going to do. So they outlined a whole series of different forms of warfare. One notable one that you may be familiar with would be drug warfare. Why are there 100,000 fentanyl deaths a year in America today? Well, it has to do with the supply chains coming from China and the Chinese regime being involved in every step of that supply chain, all the way to the cartels. So that would be a drug warfare piece. Well, unrestricted warfare basically means that any method, okay, any way that the Chinese Communist Party or China interacts with the US can and will be used as a tool of war if that is possible to do. And one thing I wanted to mention also is that I'm going to provide a series of references that will be sent to everyone participating in this call, and then later if this video is posted, so you'll get an actual link to the translation of the book Unrestricted Warfare, so you can check it out for yourself, because we only have a limited amount of time here. Okay, so next, in 2017, there was a national intelligence law passed in China, and the national intelligence law, I'm going to summarize super briefly, it requires that every Chinese national, basically everyone under the auspices of the Chinese Communist Party, under the Chinese regime, which, by the way, ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, is required to spy for the regime. It's required to provide whatever intelligence the regime may ask, the state security may ask for, and also to not disclose that it is providing that information. So that is by law. Another element, and this is actually one of the top 7, it was elevated to become one of the top 7 national priorities by Xi Jinping, of course, who's the paramount leader of the country, the dictator at the moment. It's this doctrine of civil-military fusion, or military-civil fusion, technically. Again, the idea here is that anything that has any civilian technology development, for example, that has a military potential, that military potential must be explored and developed if such capability exists. And so we're going to explore, as we continue through this talk, what kind of military potential may be. And remember again that we're in a world where it's not just kinetic warfare. This is an unrestricted warfare scenario where anything can be used for military, that again, that might be able to be used as a tool against the regime. I'll actually, against the United States. I'm going to quickly read you the definition of military-civil fusion from the State Department website, okay? It's an aggressive national strategy of the Chinese Communist Party. Its goal is to enable the PRC to develop the most technologically advanced military in the world. As the name suggests, a key part of MCF, that's military-civil fusion, is the elimination of barriers between China's civilian research and commercial sectors, its military and defense industrial sectors. Okay, and that the Secretary Xi personally oversees the strategy's implementation. In other words, everything has to come together to enhance Chinese power. That's how I view this. And you really make a point of doing this because this is something that the General Secretary sees as a top priority. Something else that I don't see discussed enough, and this is actually something that John and I spoke about today, is that there's a general lack of information about how the Chinese regime both functions internally and also the types of aggression that it acts on against the West. And this topic, which is the concept of comprehensive national power, or CNP, is something that I just don't hear discussed very often. The Chinese regime is kind of, you can think of them, they're obsessed with statistics, okay? And every single country in the world, it basically develops a single number, which is the comprehensive national power measure for that country. And that measure is relative to China itself, okay? And the way it functions in its foreign policy is it seeks to raise its comprehensive national power relative to others. So that could involve, doing something that would, and what goes into comprehensive national power? Absolutely everything you could imagine. Okay, it would be military power, of course, actual physical resources. It would be soft power, for example, media, or the ability to transmit propaganda into another country, or it might be the ability to prevent or control another country's soft power, right? For example, Hollywood, the other direction. All of this developed over a long period of time. There's a kind of a comprehensive measure for every country. The US is the top number versus China. And the way it works is, it's if you can knock the CNP measure down slightly for a country, right, and the China stays the same, that's positive. If you're going to go down, right, if you can knock the other country down further, that's positive. Okay, the key is that relatively the Chinese CNP must not get below any other nation. And the reason I mentioned that in particular is I'm thinking about the beginnings of the coronavirus pandemic. You remember what happened? There was a situation where basically there was no movement internally in China, but of people as the virus started spreading, but an allowance, complete allowance of travel, air travel outside of the country. So that would be an example of, but possibly, right, since we're going to suffer, well, maybe we're going to make sure that everybody else suffers as well, and thereby we keep our measure, above. I'm speculating here, but that would be an example of the type of thinking. Okay, so another way to summarize this is that there's the Chinese don't believe in win-win scenarios with others. Okay, not under the Chinese regime. Okay, so let's talk about data. So there's been multiple studies done on this. You probably know, I'm going to talk a little bit more about social media in general, but TikTok has been found to basically capture automatically really vast swaths of data that are above and beyond what other social media, which are already known to be extremely invasive and able to collect a whole bunch of information that you didn't know they're collecting. TikTok does this at an even greater scale, and this has been demonstrated in a number of studies. It's just something to keep in mind. There's even example, and there's sort of specific examples where there's a journalist, for example, who is actually communicating with people in the TikTok offices, getting sort of some insider information about this type of collection. And basically TikTok actually used her TikTok app to spy on her. And again, I will actually share with you the details of this particular scenario. The point is here that there's this automatic large-scale data collection. You can kind of imagine, right, potentially anything that ever comes into the field of view of the camera, right, could be collected. You have some books in the background, and this, imagine this even from the perspective of just a regular marketer, right? If you know what books a person has behind them, you know what objects they have around, you can kind of figure out that way what kind of things to sell to them. Well, here, the Chinese regime actually has a project of creating a profile on every single American. That includes not just social data, it includes genetic data and so forth. That's a whole different discussion. But the point is, there's this. It's an extremely aggressive collector of information, right? And the way you could think of it as both signals intelligence and human collection, but you collect all sorts of, this is the Chinese approach. You collect all sorts of little bits of data that you can, and if you can link them somehow to a person, you then aggregate them later using technology. And that's how a lot of these profiles are being developed. Now, some of you might remember this, the documentary, The Social Dilemma. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So some years ago, there was this documentary came out, which kind of explained how the social media companies in general are collecting incredibly large amounts of data that you're not aware of about you, and developing a profile about you that's very, very specific, and then using that data to then market to you. But not just that, to also figure out what it is that you are particularly susceptible to being engrossed in, right? And feeding you that to keep you on the app longer and longer. And then we started hearing reports about, Silicon Valley executives basically preventing their kids from using some of these apps like Instagram or Facebook and so forth, because these apps are essentially being engineered to be addictive. There's a really excellent book right now out by Jonathan Haidt called The Anxious Generation, right? I'll just quote something from him here. And you'll see how this is relevant in a moment. He said, by designing a fire hose of addictive content and entering through kids' eyes and ears, these companies have changed human development on an unimaginable scale. Okay, so it's not even just the ability to send particular types of information. But there's also like a fundamental, over time, a kind of fundamental rewiring of how people think that's happening. And this is in social media in general. Okay, now the issue is, okay, and we may not trust the big tech companies, to be incredibly benevolent actors because they have their bottom lines, they're looking to make profit, and they have ideological agendas. Well, now imagine that in the hands of a Marxist Leninist regime. And this is something where it's actually a pleasure to be speaking with people at IWP, because I know you're very familiar with this. This is something that I don't need to spend a ton of time explaining, right? And to summarize, it's about power. And to give an example of the type of moral reality that we're functioning in, many countries around the world now agree that the extreme human rights violations, the crimes against humanity that are happening in Xinjiang province, for example, are actually construe a genocide, the deliberate attempt to, eliminate a group of people. Robert Destro, the former head of Democracy, Rights, and Labor at the State Department, he would, we had an interview some time ago, and he agreed that there's at least three groups: the Tibetans, the Falun Gong, and of course the Uyghurs, that are experiencing this level of persecution. So that, and there's also this organ harvesting regime that I would guess many of you, John and I, would mention that today as well. But there's an actual billion-dollar industry in China where both high-level officials and transplant tourists can come and within weeks, in many cases, receive new organs believed to be sourced from prisoners of conscience, because there's no credible organ donation system in the country. So the reason I mention this, and again, for IWP graduates and people that are connected with IWP, this is less of a shock, but we're talking about a very different moral compass, okay? And it's a pathological state. So my point is that anything that could be done using such an app is very likely to be done, and it's very fair and reasonable to assume the worst, okay, of what's possible. So another thing so a few peculiarities, okay, of TikTok. So one of them is that, and some people don't know about this, is that TikTok itself is actually banned in China. So there's a sister app called Douyin, and Douyin is a kind of educational app. It has a time limit on how long people can watch it, and it has, all sorts of instructional videos, but it has, in essence, very, very limited, if not none, of this, highly addictive short form content that has made TikTok grow into the largest social media app in the world. By the way, the size of that, I should mention that. I think it's at something like 1.4 billion users right now. That's about 170 million in the United States. And of course, it's a much younger demographic. So it's a huge level of influence. So it's banned in China itself, okay? And it's also, the TikTok algorithm is considered to be a state secret. It's not just a proprietary secret of TikTok. It's actually a state secret of the Chinese regime. Okay. So now as you know, there's been a law that's been passed to force the divestiture of TikTok. Essentially, the idea is that within a fairly short period of time, TikTok, ByteDance needs to sell TikTok to some sort of American company. And we could actually, in the Q&A, we can discuss some of the details of the bill if you like. But one of the things that was quite notable is that in the legal challenge to the law, which was signed by the president not too long ago, it's almost like ByteDance kind of reveals a secret here. And they basically say it's actually communist China that is preventing the divestiture from happening. It's not ByteDance itself. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about how an app like this can function. So we know through work of a man named Dr. Robert Epstein that this is an example. And as far as I know, he's just starting to work on TikTok. He's done a lot of work on Facebook and Google and some of the other big tech companies. But you can influence. What he did was he created a simulator of Google. Okay, and he found that if he rearranges the names of potential political candidates, what he can do simply by rearranging their position in the search, and something that looks exactly like Google, but he's actually controlling, he can change the decisions of people who are originally undecided in selecting a person a dramatic amount of the time. And I forget the exact statistic right now, but basically without those people even being aware that they've been manipulated at all. The reason I'm mentioning this is, and this is all done through something called ephemeral experiences. This is something that actually Google documents as a concept. I would guess it's the general concept in the industry. But what I mean by ephemeral experiences is when you see a search result, you only see it for a moment, and then you go to your next search, and no one, unless there's a camera filming what actually happened there, no one will ever know. And whatever you saw goes into your mind and affects you somehow. And of course, Dr. Epstein has shown that that it can affect you profoundly to the point where you make a change in your thinking without you even realizing that change was manifested. So your ability, there's examples where sheer volumes of content is something we can look at, right? For example, let's say you're China and you don't want a lot of discussion about Uyghurs, about Hong Kong, about Tibet, about things which you think are particularly sensitive issues. Well, there's a company that did a comparison of the prevalence of certain kinds of content, okay? And looking at these specific examples that I gave you, and found on Instagram, these things were dramatically more represented, right? And by the way, and remember that actual Chinese in China are not using this app at all, right? This is just the general population. So you might expect at different times these hashtags would have similar amounts, but there's a dramatic lowering of these types of topics relative to other popular topics, which were used as a baseline. So that's one example. Another example would be possibly in a similar vein was immediately after October 7th. What we saw was a massive surge in pro-Palestinian and in many cases pro-Hamas content on TikTok. It was an extreme. It was something like 97% of the views of the filling of the ecosystem was that kind of content versus 3% or something like that of it pro-Israel content. So again, that it's true that young people might be more interested in the pro-Palestinian content, but not nearly to that degree. So you can imagine a situation, right, where, let's say someone that is, because of your incredibly detailed profile that you've developed on them through studying every aspect of their online interaction and everything that was in their background, your AI has told you that this person, for example, has a particular type of mental instability. Okay, it wouldn't be too hard to feed them the things that would, in a slightly higher proportion, and no one would ever know because of ephemeral experiences, to increase that. And we know through a ton of research, like for example, in the anxious generation, that just the use of these social media as they exist right now, the normal use, is actually, quite damaging to young people. So you again, you could kind of supercharge this, assuming you were running something that the CCP calls disintegration warfare, okay, which is a type of one of these unconventional wars where you should foment chaos in society, as an example. Okay, so I'm going to finish here. I'm going to open it up to questions. Of course, I've just scratched the surface here, and I will provide you with a bunch of references relative to everything we just talked about to help if you want to know more details, because there's a lot. But I'd love to get your questions now.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Keelik. It was such an insightful lecture, and I usually get one question per time so that guest speakers have enough time. Is that okay with you?
Can you? I would say take as many as we need.
Yeah. So I already see a list of questions, and I'm gonna start with. This is from Mr. Orth. TikTok is one of the tools used by the CCP to attack the West. I guess this is more like comment. Um, I don't see a question. Um, Maybe this is tied to the next question. What do you see as Donald Trump's motivation for joining TikTok?
Haha, that's a great question. I was betting that someone would ask that. Well, I believe that Donald Trump, the former president, has people advising him, telling him there's a lot of interest in him and other I guess Trump-related topics on TikTok. And Biden is on TikTok, opened up an account not too long ago, the current president. And so you should do that too. You should win that war. After all, you're very good at social media, Mr. President. So I would guess that that's what happened. I mean, it seemed like there was a great amount of interest. I saw his account grew massively. My general comment on this is, it's concerning to me that both the current president and the former president and the front runner for on the Republican side for president is, are both prominent on an app which is controlled by the Chinese regime. How they will use it, I don't know, right? But they certainly can.
Thank you. And the next question is, a lot of what I'm hearing about China's use of TikTok, for example, data collection, profile building, explains my rationale for not having social media to include LinkedIn. Do you believe that similar threats about TikTok apply to other social media platforms? If not, why not? If so, would similarly stated principles apply?
I think that all social media collect incredible amounts of information about you. Okay. The difference is that in the case of TikTok, it's in the hands of a pathocratic regime that seeks to subvert America and has zero respect for human life and human dignity. So that to me makes it a completely different level of threat and issue. Do American social media companies need to be reformed? Do I suggest that kids not have smartphones, until 16? I don't know what the age would be. I would consult with Jonathan Haidt and others. Yeah, I do. I think that's right. But I just think the level of threat and the level of malevolent intent is a completely different level. Because the other part that we didn't discuss is, and again, I guess I'm going to need to provide some more references. A lot of people don't understand that the Chinese regime is an expansionist power that's jealously guarding its own power, and it sees America as an existential threat to itself simply by existing as a free society.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, especially the last comment. And the next question is, outside of TikTok, should there be any other social media platforms we should be concerned about?
It's kind of a similar question. Oh, I would say, any TikTok is a relatively new app, and the reason it's become so successful is because it's leveraged this addictive nature of social media in a no holds barred, no boundary way. That's my view. Okay, so I think um, and of course it's controlled by the Chinese Communist said. So I think it's a unique threat. Okay, it's a unique threat. I've heard arguments that other apps coming out of China, Temu, any app that's frankly built in China that has a large following that gathers lots of your personal information, has the potential for that, is an issue. Um, I do is social media in general, are they a problem? Yeah, I mean, I think so. Um, I think the ones that are coming out of free societies are less of a problem. But if you're concerned about your personal information being picked up by intelligence collection or whatever, I mean, this is, of course, this is all going to be happening, and in some cases not just for nefarious purposes, right? So I don't know if I've answered your question enough, but I think everyone should approach all social media with skepticism, and partially you just look at the record of the social media. I think if they're engaged in a lot of censorship activities, I would be a lot more wary of those. There's some that are less, but again, I just think that the ones that are governed by the CCP, TikTok in particular, are just a unique threat that's above and beyond anything like order of magnitude difference.
Hmm. Okay, and the next question is, do you have any book recommendations about China, TikTok, or the changing environment? Additionally, knowing the impact of TikTok and other influences of adversaries, what steps and proactive approaches do you suggest if using social media?
Okay, so there's two big questions. Do I have certain books that I would recommend? Yes, I do think there's something called, um, gosh, I could give a lot of books here. Okay, for starters, there's a book called The Nine Commentaries on the Communist Party. Now, this is an interesting book because it was one of the first sort of accounting of the Chinese regime and its history and its misdeeds done by Chinese itself. And this was published in the early 2000s and quickly became one of the most banned books in China. I think that's a unique book. It's got a kind of fiery prose, very, I guess, very strong opinions, and also a lot of really good information. And it launched this what's called the Quit the Communist Party movement. So that's something that I would recommend reading, just because it's fascinating, and it's also really, it's done from the Chinese perspective. Another book that comes to mind, and again, I've just interviewed a few people on issues like this, but I feel like I shouldn't sort of pick favorites. One from a while back that's kind of stuck with me is a book by Clyde Prestowitz called The World Turned Upside Down. And I think that would be a book that's worth checking out. Recent book that I enjoyed by Mike Sobolik, someone who was very active in the TikTok debate actually himself. Um, uh, the name is escaping me right now. If someone could look that up for me, that would be incredibly helpful. But that's a good book. And frankly, there's quite a few that I would recommend. Maybe what I'll do is in the email that they'll send out, I'll provide a bunch of books that I feel are particularly good on China.
And the next question is, how
Oh,
would you go ahead?
I thought there was a second question that I just missed. I just realized. how to protect yourself on social media a little bit, something like that, right?
I can read it
Um,
out. I can read it out again for you. So the
okay.
second question is, additionally, knowing the impact of TikTok and other influences of adversaries, what steps and proactive approaches do you suggest of using social media?
So there's something you can do, which is called uh, Facebook Container, for example. It's a plugin for Firefox if you use that browser. I don't know if it exists or elsewhere. But so what Facebook will do is it has this technology that's called a pixel. The reason why Facebook advertising is so effective is because it's sort of um, in its ideal world, it tracks you wherever you go, right? And then is able to serve you up very specific ads. If you're doing Facebook advertising, you can select a very tight demographic in theory. Kind of works to greater or lesser extent, but it makes it particularly effective. So you can spend a small amount of money to hit a very targeted demographic. But the way they get that information is by kind of tracking you everywhere. So a Facebook container plugin for Firefox, what that does is it prevents that interface from happening. Now the problem is that you have all sorts of cookie in your typical web experience. You have all these cookies that are gathered that are coming into your system all the time, and these are all designed to track you and then to serve ads. And a lot of these companies, they buy and sell each other's data, and they to further aggregate their profiles of you. And everyone's trying to kind of build one of these profiles and then basically sell to you. You're kind of a commodity, right, in this ecosystem. So I mean, another thing you can do, but this is the biggest thing you have to understand. There's a trade-off between convenience and security. Okay, so the more secure you want to get, the less convenient it's going to be for you. And in the most convenient way, everything's plugged in, everything's synchronized, you have a seamless experience, you're moving, it's all very easy, but everything's being tracked. Another way, some of your web viewing or all of it, you're doing through a VPN and anonymous through there's usually like a private setting on every browser. I forget, they have different names, but you can kind of look it up. Most browsers have this version, but like they're a combination of and all of these things have their problems. Some sites don't like to run on VPNs. They try to make sure that you confirm that you're really human. But ultimately, it's like trying to put as many barriers as you can between yourself and the data collection, so they can't quite zero in on you. But all of that, just makes your life more inconvenient. That I guess that would be the quickest answer. When it comes to TikTok, you just should never have it on your phone ever.
Hmm. Another social media related question. How would you respond to a layman, in this case, a parent in North America, when they think TikTok is more or less the same comparing to Facebook or Instagram? If you only have 60 seconds, what would you say to this person in order to encourage them to delete the app or encourage them to talk to their kids that use the app?
Um, okay, I think for kids, to be perfectly straightforward, you're not going to convince the kid, because this app is the most juiced up, addictive technology that has ever existed. This is why I argue, the CCP has many potent weapons against America. My position is that this might even be the most powerful, because it has the power to shift public opinion, right, quickly, by pushing out into 170 million users in a relatively short period of time, something, right? It has the power to keep you stuck this isn't just restricted to TikTok, but TikTok's uniquely good at it, right? So you can make it whatever arguments you want, but your kid's going to be going back to that thing because they're addicted. I've been addicted to video games before. I know what it's like. So I think you have to stop it. And if they're of an age where you can't, do the tough parental love. I think you just have to tell them, look, this is, extremely damaging to your psyche. And there's a ton of really good studies to prove that. Here I think that The Anxious Generation is a great book for this. There's a reason it's doing really well. It's written in a way that's very accessible, I think, to almost anyone. But so if they're ready to read a book like that, that would be helpful. But I think, quite honestly, for kids, it's going to be tough love because this stuff is so addictive. Now, and I didn't even talk about the prevalence of, porn and other like really, stuff that's just, instantly damaging even in small amounts.
I have a question, interesting question related to national security. So, putting aside the design of social media platforms and the Chinese national security law, how does the data collection by ByteDance/TikTok differ from other social media companies like Instagram or Facebook? As much as possible, from the technical perspective, how does TikTok or the Chinese government process the data gathered differently from the US based social media companies?
Yeah, this is, I think I'm going to have to refer you to a few different resources because I'm also like, I'm not necessarily a technical expert. My review of what I believe are credible studies tells me that the level of data collection, there's things you can collect off of a phone, right? And of course, but TikTok is designed to collect even at times when you don't think it is, and it does, and it does it at a more than others. I mean, that would be I'm just kind of giving a general picture, but I'll provide you with some of the references to this so that you can actually look up the technical details. In terms of processing, that's a great question. China, frankly, is a bit of a black box, but I know like they're obsessed with data collection in general, right? This whole intelligence gathering, even from the, and this is where Dr. Juan Amanda, you could kind of correct me if I'm wrong here, but the way I envision it, right, is even the Chinese human intelligence, right? And there's, I think it was actually John that mentioned to me that in Silicon Valley alone, there's an IWP alumnus who said there's 25,000 collectors in the Silicon Valley alone, right, of people. The idea is that every collector isn't like James Bond spy and they're breaking into something and they're getting it. No, it's just like whatever looks interesting and could potentially be valuable. And with the knowledge that your social credit score and your, ingratiating yourself to the Communist Party is going to be positive if you are delivering regular good information. I'm diverging here a little bit because what I'm trying to say is even the human intelligence functions this way to some extent, where there's a mass collection of as much data as possible, which is then sorted back together using AI and other processes. And I think there's similarity to that in what is done here, certainly. And I don't know exactly how it's done over there, but that's kind of the approach. And the approach is to get, incredibly detailed profiles down to the genetics of every American. As a national security priority might turn out to be useful, right? And again, I can provide you with some references for that. But in terms of exactly how it works in China, I don't think there's a lot of good information on that.
Yeah, that's true. And the next question, I think this one is an important one. Can Jan address the reports of a huge amount of anti-Israel, anti-Semitic content on TikTok? Has he seen any good tracking?
There's one study that I saw fairly early on that showed the 97.3% that I mentioned. This is frankly, I would have to look because I haven't seen what has come out since. in general, and by the way, I don't use TikTok, so for full disclosure, right, I'm using information that's fed to me by people who are doing these studies and research. I don't use it because I'm a target and I don't want to be collected on in that way. But there's a very clear pattern of anything that's, see, like the Israel Hamas, right? It's, of course, there's a geopolitical conflict there, but there's also the content related to Hamas. I mean, you've seen some of the, maybe some of the clips or pictures where it's like, you know, people are saying things like "kill the hostages," right? That this is, you know, it's really not just, it's something that goes beyond the geopolitical into America is evil here. I guess ideological positioning, and I think that that's extremely convenient for the Chinese regime to be pushing that, because that's kind of their goal, right? They've been educating their own population. You know, I forget that America has, you know, been, I would say, you know, unbelievably helpful to the Chinese regime. Many would argue, and I would agree with them, that we built the world's biggest dictatorship. In effect, it was built on the back of America. Okay, but the Chinese regime has been indoctrinating its own people for 40 years that America is evil and is trying to take China down. You know, trying to hurt China, right? I mean, it's actually an unbelievable juxtaposition. That on the one hand there was this, you know, incredible love and giving of the benefit of the doubt for 40, you know, for decades, and on the other hand, that this is how it was reciprocated internally. So okay, I'm getting long-winded here. I will look and see what other studies are in this area. I know who to talk to about this, and we'll add that to the references. Maybe I'll make sure Irene, our producer here, reminds me to do that.
Okay, so now I have two questions. China is well known to have an obsession with extreme control over its citizens. Considering that TikTok is such a powerful tool for that goal, why does the CCP ban the app within China? And also, the following question is also, as you mentioned, TikTok helped in increasing pro Hamas support in younger demographics. If American social media outlets dominated, would the same have happened?
Okay. Great. Those are both great questions. Can you remind me the first question again?
The first question was, China is well known to have an obsession with extreme control over its
Right.
citizens. Considering that TikTok is such a powerful tool for that goal,
Yeah.
why does the CCP ban it within China?
Okay. Okay, that's an excellent question. My suspicion is, okay, it has this sister app, which I think is based on the same technology. The reason is that the content would be so, this is my conjecture, the content would be so dramatically, the content that they would allow would be so dramatically different, okay, that it would be obvious that something really nefarious is going on if they were to allow it, okay? What am I saying here? A lot of the content on TikTok is, you know, a colloquial way to put it would be brain melting. Okay, it's incredibly destructive to the social fabric, to individuals. It's rewiring people in negative ways. Not just TikTok. Okay, just TikTok is that weaponized by the Chinese regime. Okay, so they don't want to do that to their population. Yeah, they have ways of controlling the population. They're obsessed with that, as you point out very rightly. They are, but they're not looking to, you know, damage their people. They want to you know, use them. You know, they want them to be fully functional, so to speak, right? And there's just increasing research coming out about how damaging, you know, prolonged social media use is on people in general, and especially young people. So that's the answer to the first question. Now, my short-term memory is apparently very poor. The second question, just if you could summarize, I'll remember it.
So the second question was TikTok helped in increasing pro-Hamas support in younger demographics.
Right. Would
If
it have
America,
happened? Yeah. Would it have happened if it wasn't for TikTok? If it was just American social media? Sadly, I think that to some extent, yes. The reason for this is, some of the work, for example, that I've been doing on, I have a show called American Thought Leaders, where I interview thought leaders on issues which I think are important. And one of them, one of the topics has been the education system in America. And in effect, the American education system, part of the reason why it's so bad, sorry to say, is that it's been co-opted by a sort of what Paulo Freire's approach to education. Paulo Freire's approach is kind of I mean, this is very glib, and I'll again provide you a good reference where I can give you all the details on this, but it's, use the pretext of what you're actually teaching, like math or geography or whatever, as only just a pretext to do the real teaching, which is a conscientization, which is actually, fomenting a kind of critical consciousness and activism in young people in this oppressor-oppressed dichotomy, which you'll be familiar with in the sort of conventional Marxism and also some of these cultural Marxist derivatives. There's always this oppressor and oppressed, and the way it works in that intersectional hierarchy of the oppressor-oppressed is the Palestinians are low on that, and the Israelis are high. Jews are high in general. And this is actually, so you can kind of think of it as anti-Semitism is baked into this ideology, and young people have been gone through some generations now of this approach to education. Of course, it doesn't affect everybody equally. A lot of people, I would describe it as something that's very anti-reality. So some people aren't as susceptible, but some people are, and it's created this sort of situation where the anti-Semitism is baked in. So you have a lot more anti-Semitism among young people because they have come to believe in that identitarian structure that the Palestinians are the oppressed people relative to Israelis or Jews. So I think it would still have happened, but I just think that what came through TikTok was a supercharged version, and just sort of, it's like, I read this somewhere recently, but it's like, there's a fire, and the CCP standing there with the empty gas can nearby, something like that.
So we have about 6 minutes left. I think we can take maybe 2 more questions. The next question is, how does Jeff Ya's ownership stake in TikTok impact TikTok's popularity in the U.S., usefulness for the CCP as a tool against the U.S., and the possible divestment?
Well, having a billionaire on your side is obviously very helpful. Everything I know, I don't know him personally. My sense of him is that he is a genuine, libertarian, like someone who, actually believes in free speech, not just cynically because he has this massive stake in TikTok. It's, a considerable portion of his wealth or potential wealth. But I do think that in this, he's somewhat, I would say he's probably somewhat conflicted, maybe doesn't even realize that he is. People often will say, well, this TikTok is just a free speech issue. For example, this legislation, it gives too many powers to the executive, or, this is just sort of, American, intelligence agencies wanting to take, to have this kind of control that the Chinese regime has. I'll be blunt about it. I think that would be if that's what would have to happen, I would absolutely prefer that 1,000 times over right, than having the Chinese state security in charge of something that has this level of influence on our young people in society. Um, uh, so I would say it has a considerable effect. Um, and I can't get into his head. That I feel like I would hope that he could understand the national security dimension and the real threat that exists here better. I would hope that people around him could share that information with him more effectively. But I think this is the challenge when I know a few billionaires, and the problem is that most of the people around you are a lot of, unless you actively surround yourself by people who are contrarian, which is hard to do. A lot of people just kind of, do a lot of confirmation bias for you because, they're kind of, being around the money is something that they need, or it's part of the reason that they're there in the first place. So if that makes sense.
And this will be the last question. It's actually a series of questions for today's event. Why is TikTok banned in China, assuming it's not for the mental health benefits of Chinese people and seemingly would provide the CCP a tool for further control over its citizens? Would it present Chinese people with too much potential access to the truth? Along these lines, do you believe there's a potential worthwhile endeavor that in trying to counter false narratives with the truth on TikTok, or is the platform too far gone?
That's a very interesting question. That is a very interesting question. Well, the first part I've kind of already answered. Okay, the first part is, why don't they have it in China if it's so influential? Uh, it, Basically, they can control. TikTok, like, I imagine, like, it's a set of dials. I think, actually, I remember this from a conversation I had with Matt Taibbi once. You can kind of, this in any social media, if you can kind of dial up what, there's more of something, dial down, there's less, right, of something else. So, even on international TikTok, they've dialed down any content related to the areas, Falun Gong, Uyghurs, Tibet, what these things, Hong Kong, democracy in China, any of that is all dialed down very internationally. And of course it would be dialed down. This is what I was saying, it would just be such an extreme difference, because they would have to figure out how to dial down an incredible amount of stuff. It would be a completely different app. In fact, it might be an app that looks very similar to Douyin, right? Which is why they have it. And they can still exert that kind of control. They can still have that, captive audience, and feed people the things they want to feed them, right? Which of course they do, because they control that app completely, just like they do ultimately TikTok. So that's the first part. The second part is, the app too far gone for someone to try to leverage it to provide truthful information? No. I mean, I think people can use it to provide truthful information. This is certainly the argument that would be given to, um, any human rights organization that is on there. And I can completely see why people do, but you have to understand that there's a trade-off here, and it's, right, and that all your information is being collected, and um, is going to is if there's a way to use it against you, and that is beneficial to the Chinese regime, and they have a particular interest in that, they will do it. Okay, so yeah, there's potential to spread truthful information. I know people who have TikTok accounts. They try to, for example, do all sorts of safeguards. Like, in one case, I know someone who has a phone that only is for faith, only is for that. So that might be something you might consider. If you're someone that's of greater interest, perhaps I would stay away from it.
Well, Jan, thank you so much, and thank you everybody for raising such insightful and interesting and important questions. And before I conclude today's event, I want to share a couple upcoming events of the China Asia program. So, I believe Dr. John Lanchowski is actually joining this event. And he is, for those who are new to IWP, he's the founder of IWP as well as President Emeritus. So he will be giving a virtual lecture on China sometime in late summer or early fall. And we also, in the fall semester, this coming fall semester, we will have serving FBI special agent who'll be giving a lecture on China and cyber. And also, we'll have former CIA ops officer whose team actually took down the AQCon network. He'll be giving a lecture on his experience as well as human intelligence. So stay tuned, and thank you again, everybody, for joining today's event.